Good morning and welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. My name is Bill Henricks. I am pastor of St. John's Episcopal Church in Cohoes. I'm also a member of the Ignatian Volunteer Corps, and through them, I'm a volunteer at the Capital Area Council of Churches. And I'm delighted that we're offering this program, and thank you for joining us, especially the panelists here. This past year has been a difficult year, a challenging year, actually more than a year now. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted how we worship, how we do education, discipleship. It has made pastoral care very challenging. Most of us have now mastered some skills that we never thought we needed. Like how to hold a Zoom meeting or how to do remote worship, all things that we learned to do because of the pandemic. Now, thanks to the vaccines, the threat of the pandemic is receding, restrictions are being lifted, and that is all great news. But it does leave us with some very basic questions. For example, as we move on from the pandemic, what will Christianity in the Capital Region look like as we go forward? Are there things we learned from the pandemic that we need to take with us into the months and years to come? Are there changes that are going to take place in our church that we anticipate because of the pandemic? To answer these questions and other questions, we've assembled a group of 5 panelists from 5 different denominations with 5 different perspectives. We hope God will bless what they're offering so that you can leave inspired and hopefully learn some new things from what they're going to share with us today. There'll be a chance to ask questions at the end of their presentations. Some questions have already come in, and we'll hold those until after we have our breakout session. For now, I'd like to start with introducing our panelists. One of them, Brittany Moore, pastor of Spindle City Vineyard Church in Cohoes, is not able to be with us in person, but she met with Bruce France and me yesterday, and we recorded her response. So Bruce, if you play her introduction, please. So just, 1 or 2 minutes, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. My name is Brittany Moore, and I'm the lead pastor over at Spindle City Vineyard Church in Cohoes, New York. I have my 6-month-old Judah with me, so if you hear rattling in the background, it is him. And I've been pastoring here for, I've been on staff at the church since basically, September of 2010. I came on as an administrator. I've been a pastor here since August of 2015, and have been the lead pastor since 2016. So it's been almost 5 years that I've been serving this congregation as a lead pastor, but I've been with them for a lot longer. My husband and I have 2 kids. We both live in the city of Cohoes. We both work in the city of Cohoes. My husband does Cohoes City Life, which is a part of the ministry of Youth for Christ in the Capital District. And we love our community. We've been married for a couple of years and have lived in different parts of Cohoes, but we have really felt a call from God to put down really good roots here and invest and be here long term.
Excellent, thank you. As Pastor Brittany Moore. Dr. Booth, can you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Roxanne Jones Booth, and I serve as the co-pastor of the Riverview Missionary Baptist Church in Queens, New York. I serve alongside my husband. We've been here. Matter of fact, yesterday we celebrated 11th Pastoral Appreciation Day. So for 11 years, we've been serving. Prior to coming here, we were mission workers in Southern Africa, in the country of Eswatini, and in South Africa. So we're blessed to be here. And we thank you for the opportunity to serve on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Father Butler, can you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Pat Butler. I'm the pastor at St. Edward's Catholic Community in Clifton Park. Been here since 2006 and have enjoyed being in such a large community. Got a lot of activities going on and look forward to continuing that post-pandemic. I'm very happy to be here today.
And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Father Scott Garno.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Father Scott Garno. I serve as the rector or pastor of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Delmar. Celebrated 4 years here on May 1st. And prior to that, spent 11 years as a pastor of an Episcopal church down in the Susquehanna Valley in Unadilla. My wife and I have 4 kids, 1 with the Lord and 3 in school, 15, 12, and 6. So as you can imagine, our house is pretty active all the time. And along with being pastor of St. Stephen's, I also serve as the president of the standing committee for the Episcopal Diocese of Albany. And it's a pleasure to be here this morning.
Thank you for joining us. And Chris Mester, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Chris Messler-Wilhelm. I'm a member of the reopening team at Westminster Presbyterian Church in downtown Albany. We've been meeting on a regular basis since last summer, working on plans to reopen, which will begin with a soft reopening in July for in-person services. We've been meeting virtually since March of 2020.
Thank you. And then Bruce France is not a panelist, but he is kind of behind all of this today. So Bruce, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, be more than happy to. I'm the executive director of the Capital Area Council of Churches and been here for just 2 years now. Before that, actually came from about 38 years working in business. Was a little surprised when a board member approached me about this particular job, but I prayed on it and had decided to take the plunge, and hopefully a lot of the skills that I've developed over my life are helping me with this job, certainly along with God's assistance. So thrilled to be here and thrilled to have all of you here this morning.
And as Bruce said earlier, as you join us, if you've not already done so, please enter your church into the chat feature so we know what congregations you're from. So we'll start. Again, Pastor Moore is not with us today, but we talked to her yesterday, and she shared us a bit how the pandemic has prompted her and the leaders of her church to really look at the basics of their faith. So let's listen to Brittany's response. Last time we were speaking, you talked about how the pandemic prompted you and the leaders of your church to re-examine your whole mission ministry. Can you say more about that?
Sure. So it felt like when the pandemic, leading up to the pandemic, we had a lot of big questions about the culture of church and what we were reading in Acts chapter 2 and greater parts of the New Testament, and the simplicity, the movement orientation, and how easily replicable it was. And so when the pandemic hit, it was this opportunity. It's almost like when you want to do construction on your home, you want to renovate. It's a lot harder when you're living in the renovations. And the pandemic was a lot like everybody kind of leaving the house and giving us an opportunity to kind of kick up all the dust and do some of the things we felt the Lord was calling us to do. And so we took advantage of that and really said, what is the culture that we see in the New Testament? How do we replicate that for today? The average church in America spends approximately $15,000 per baptism. So about $15,000 per new disciple in the journey of becoming a disciple maker themselves. And we are a little below that. Our church did the math and we're about $8,000 per baptism. And that's just something I'm not okay with as a pastor. That's not easily replicable. That's very expensive. And that's not what we see organically happening in the New Testament. And so as a leadership team, we just started really praying and said, God, I feel like the pandemic is an opportunity to say we don't want to keep doing what we've been doing because that's what you do for a church in America. I said we want to do what you are doing, partner with what the Holy Spirit has already put favor on. And so it has allowed us to just stop doing some programming, to shift some of the roles some of our pastors are doing. I myself, all of us are stepping back to being more co-vocational because we just see that as a better opportunity to be in and among our communities. And more than anything, I think it shook us awake to say, we've been really complacent about how outward focused we are. We've been so good at creating really cozy nooks for people to come and be part of the church, but how engaged are we in our very own neighborhoods? Do we know our neighbors by name? Do they know us? Are we serving as salt and light in our workplaces, in our schools? Are we fully engaged in the very places God is around us? And does every single person in our church, no matter if they are 5 years old or 95, do they know how to make a disciple? Have they been trained and equipped in that? So for us, the pandemic allowed us to press pause on a lot of the things we were doing on autopilot and just begin to be really intentional and begin to redirect us back to the core pieces of worship, prayer, reaching out to those around us, and celebrating communion and community together.
Excellent. Thank you. That was Pastor Brittany Moore. Chris Messler, you mentioned that you are part of your reopening team in your congregation. Can you share with us a bit of some of the challenges you faced on that team and what's been involved in reopening your congregation again?
Yes, one of the first challenges that we had is that we called a new pastor in May of 2020. So our pastor, Reverend Kirk Davidoff, has never preached in person in our sanctuary. We've had a few in-person Sundays in one of the local parks, but that was a challenge for us. I think that we've had to handle a lot of disappointments as the team. I think a good example is our Christmas Eve service. We were looking at the increasing rates of COVID in the Capital District during the time of the holidays, and we were not able to have an in-person Christmas Eve service. We discussed having very small services, multiple services, and instead ended up with a Zoom Christmas Eve service. And worked through the disappointments with the members of the church. We've had a lot of discussion with people, but we do have to look at the individual needs of the members of our congregation. Probably one of the most significant needs was the isolation. And members of our reopening team serve on the various boards within our church. I serve on the board of deacons along with another one of the members. And we've worked with really trying to meet the needs of isolation with the seniors by doing every once a month, a Friday TGIF Zoom session. And yes, you can have 90-year-olds participating in Zoom meetings. They actually end up giving each other instructions on how to connect. We really also had to look at addressing the different uses of our church. Our church serves as a breakfast program for the Focus Ministries in Albany. And we are permitted as a food service establishment, which has very different guidelines than the current guidelines for religious services that have been issued by the state. So we had to really educate members of our congregation on the fact that, yes, we can have people in the church for the food program while we're not having services on Sunday. So a lot of it was really educating and communicating to the members of our congregation. One of the other challenges that had to be addressed was the children in the church. And we didn't want the children in the church to have a solid year with no church school. And we're able to actually institute a Zoom church school program after many of these kids have been on Zoom all week with their Monday through Friday school. It was just reported last week when we had our Children's Sunday that we had the highest attendance ever in our church school program, which shows really the hard work and dedication of not only the team, but the various members of our congregation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Father Scott Garno, you mentioned that you are pastor of a church in Delmar. You're also the president of the standing committee. From the perspective of looking at the whole Episcopal Diocese of Albany, Can you share with us what some of the primary opportunities and challenges are that churches are facing as they plan for the future?
Yeah, happy to do that. Thanks, Bill. So I was able to look at a lot of responses from the churches of the Diocese of Albany, which spans from south of Albany all the way up to the Canadian border, 19 counties in northeast New York. And as you can imagine, the responses varied across the board. But as I was looking at them, they seem to fall into 4 general categories, with some outliers, of course, but a lot of the responses fell into 4 categories. First being rebuilding church membership or continued growth in church membership. What does evangelism look like these days? How do we encourage people to return to worship? I've had a number of people that when they come back to worship over the last month or so have said, you know, I really appreciated the online services because I could stay connected to my church community. But man, it's so much better to be in person. So how do we get folks to re-engage with in-person worship? And then a lot of churches mentioned about regaining whatever momentum they had going into the pandemic. How do we regain that momentum that was lost? A second category of answers and responses fell into the category of re-engaging, whether that be in children's programming, youth programming, or adult programming. One of the opportunities is building upon the online outreach that many churches have had in their programming. Many churches had shifted Bible studies and other adult programs. Many shifted children's programming online. And what opportunities are available there for reaching out to people that may be even outside of our normal geographical draw, if you will. One of the challenges of re-engaging people in programming is, what does hospitality and fellowship look like right now? And what will that look like moving forward? A lot of the restrictions are lessening, but some people are still anxious about that. So what is fellowship and hospitality going to look like? A lot of us have been limited in how much we can engage with our neighborhood. So how do we start doing that together? A third category was an encouragement from us for many churches in staying together in the midst of change. We've all been through massive amounts of change and massive struggles over the last year plus. But what a lot of churches have found is that it's actually drawn them closer together. We may not be able to be physically together, but in many respects, it's drawn us closer together because we've had this shared experience of adversity. And how can we build on that? A challenge of that, staying together in the midst of it, is a number of congregations are self-identified as huggy congregations. And well, that might have to shift a little bit, at least for a while. How do we do that? And then the final category was opportunities to impact further than our normal reaches. Many of our churches, I'm sure, many of our churches, but I'm sure many of your churches have found that with our online services, we're reaching people far beyond our normal regional reach. My church has people tuning in on a regular basis from Alabama to Maine to Africa and, you know, everywhere in between. So how can we start building on that reach that many of us never would have expected prior to the pandemic, but were pushed, even if reluctantly, pushed into this online realm of worship, and there's tremendous opportunities there for building on those new connections. So those are some of the things some of the general ideas that came out of that question.
Very good. Thank you very much. Father Pat Butler, you're the priest of St. Edward's in Clifton Park. with quite a few people involved in education programs, formation programs. What impact did the pandemic have on how people engaged in education formation at St. Edward's?
Historically, we've had a very vibrant adult and youth education program. Our adult programs would meet maybe 4 times a year for about 5-week sessions. We have about 100 people participating in those. And for our youth programs, we had anywhere from 1,000 to about 1,200 students. So it's always been a big part of the parish. Before the pandemic, the footprint of our campus really offered or defined the various programs and activities. Our classes and presentations were here at church. From a youth program perspective, parents and children were constantly coming and going, which was very time consuming for all of them. And it was difficult for families that had multiple children because the classes weren't always on the same day or at the same time. So it was interesting with the whole COVID protocols. It really required us to cancel any in-person classroom settings. We had to think outside the box. And so we were forced to use a lot more technology than we ever had. And for many reasons, the old classroom model was outdated. We had been using that for decades. It required dozens of teachers because we had so many students. And as I said, it was just difficult for busy families to get here. So we revamped the entire program so that it could be done at home using a combination of Google Classroom and small group sessions. What that allowed for was participation really on a family level, that the parents and younger siblings could really join in for fun and educational activities. What we found the benefits were just creating a new program was engaging and fun for those who were involved in it. And the parents were encouraged to join in, not taking a catechist role. They didn't need all of the safe environment courses and training that would go along with teaching. And we found that many of the children were just very much more comfortable in that setting. It enabled them to participate more than in the classroom setting. Children with anxiety issues or special needs, they were more comfortable in their homes. And we were really able to bring tools to the family that they needed to practice their faith at home. I think we found that with shorter online sessions, combined with the Google Classroom, it could keep the attention of the younger children and really allowed us to do more in a shorter period of time. The upper grades, we did something very similar. We developed an entire online program with small groups for all ages. And we developed a summer program for those families with children and youth who are very busy during the school year. And that way they didn't really have to decide between having their children attend faith formation or a sporting event. And it was confined to a week-long program throughout various portions of the day. Again, it was all online and very well received. We've decided to continue that on into the future, even without a lockdown. We hope to continue a hybrid model where we can get people to come into church for some social and service activities. The service program has always been part and parcel of the youth activities here in the church. And so we hope to continue to commit to local needs and mission trips for service opportunities. That's really suffered during the pandemic, but we hope to get them involved again very soon.
Excellent. Sounds very creative. Thank you very much. And then finally, Dr. Booth. A lot of churches found that as they went to in-person worship again, the attendance was significantly lower than it was pre-pandemic. I think you shared that was not the case in your congregation. Do you want to share us a little bit of how the pandemic impacted your Sunday attendance, both during the pandemic and now as we have restrictions lifted?
Certainly. In March of 2020, our congregation, like everyone else, the doors of the building were closed, But we had in 2017 begun doing Facebook Live along with our worship in the sanctuary. And so when we had to close the doors, we took the same Facebook Live platform and we were having worship from our home. We found that we couldn't go on with worship the way we did in the sanctuary. We had to conduct worship in 1 hour. If you know anything about an African American Baptist tradition, we do nothing in 1 hour. But we have come to learn how to do worship in 1 hour. We stick to the essentials: prayer, scripture, and the word of God, and we do some singing. So our worship went down to 1 hour on Facebook Live. Then we were able to re-enter the church in August of 2020. So we went back into the building and we did all of the precautions for social distancing. People came in with their masks. We took temperatures and those things. And what we saw was that people were ready to come into the building and socialize, to see people and participate in worship. And they also were appreciative of the new order of worship, where it was still 1 hour. And we found that more people than previously, before COVID, were coming to worship during this time where we had the social distance. So much so that we had to put chairs and downstairs in the fellowship hall and put in some type of closed circuit television so that people can be in the building and watch what's happening in the sanctuary. So it's been a blessing. COVID has shown us that we don't need to do all of those things that we have done previously. We do the things that are essential for worship, honoring the true and living God, and people will come. We've also had on Facebook Live, as previous Father Scott has said, that we have a fellowship now that extends across the Atlantic to countries on the continent of Africa and also Japan. And in learning to adjusting to that type of a fellowship is our next task that we have to undertake. How do we actually bring those individuals into the fellowship and into the ministry that's taking place, and be a blessing to them in their homes in these other places in the world?
Excellent. Thank you very much. I have a second question for all of you now, and we'll go back to Brittany Moore from Cohoes. When I spoke to her, I asked how her focus had changed because of the pandemic. Let's listen to her response. As we emerge from the pandemic, are there some concrete things you envision doing differently in your congregation, or new things that you haven't been doing before?
Mm-hmm. We have decided to be, I don't want to say wildly creative. It's not like we're reinventing or recreate. I mean, we're not doing anything new. We're just doing a lot of the old things. But we have changed around Sunday mornings. We've been experimenting a little bit with not doing, so in the Vineyard, there's just pretty standard, you do worship, musical worship, you celebrate the Lord's Supper, communion together, there's a message, and then you end with ministry time, which is intentional prayer for one another. And you just seek the Holy Spirit to come and move among those. And we follow basically the same structure every Sunday. And then during the week, you've got traditional outreach and you've got life groups that are meeting around the capital region. And all of those things are good, but we really said, culturally speaking, that doesn't necessarily stir up disciple makers. That can be really easy to become consumeristic in those different avenues. And so how do we take some of the consumerism out of it? And so on Sunday mornings, we've been trying out different ways of engaging our people, doing more of a discovery Bible study. So there's questions every Sunday, and then I pause to ask the congregation and give them time to think and respond. There's homework at the end of our Sundays where, I leave with not just an action set, but, most people when they're preaching, there'll be application points, which are good, but it's like, now go and try this out. And then next Sunday, we're going to ask you, how did you do? And it's been really cool because there's stories every week. Oh, I met this neighbor. Oh, I prayed for this person. Oh, I trusted God with this resource of mine. Oh, I gave this away. During the last heat wave, we had an extra air conditioner that we gave to a new family in our church, and they turned around and gave it to a neighbor. They're like, we can go and buy one. So like, let's bless this guy that they've been buying dinner for him. They've been praying for him. They felt the call to just bless him financially. So they gave him some cash, and the guy's like, enough, you guys are just too generous. And it's like, but that's exactly what we're supposed to be known for, is our generosity and our love and our compassion. So giving people more time to interact on Sunday morning has certainly been really healthy for us. And then the other piece to that is really trying to get people to take ownership of being disciple makers and saying, we don't want everybody to just come to church. Like, that's not our evangelism strategy. We want to be a really healthy, unified community, because that is part of our witness. We see that in Acts, that they were living and functioning so well together that they were added to daily. But the other piece of that is saying we live all over the capital region. We've got members quite literally in the 4 corners of the capital region. And so how do you become the pastor of your neighborhood or your workplace or your school? Because I didn't get called to that people group. You did. God planted you there for a reason. He was very strategic in how he gifted you and your passions, your interests, and the people that you know. And so helping people become accountable for their sphere of influence and really look around and say, God, who have you put me around? And how do I serve them? How do I spiritually engage them? How do I pray for them? How do I disciple them? And so for us, we've been training our people in disciple making movements and saying there's really organic and natural ways where it's not a program, but there's just some really normal habits of disciple makers that we see in scripture that you can easily replicate in your own lives. And so coming back from the pandemic, we have really been full throttle. That's the direction we're going as a church. We want people to be accountable for their faith. We want them to be accountable for the people that God's put them around. And we have chosen to change the way we do certain parts of church so that accountability, that training, that equipping is happening. And then I think it's been really fruitful so far, because every Sunday we have multiple stories of people that are praying for people. We've seen new people coming to church because their friends have been working on discipling them. And ultimately, my heart would be that the entire capital region would see gospel saturation, and that not everybody would invite their friends to the vineyard, but that they would start planting churches in Averill Park, in Troy, in Glens Falls, and Hudson Falls. And these don't have to be really expensive, huge churches. They can be micro churches, neighborhood churches, churches that meet in a break room at an office building of 4, 5, 6, 12, 20 people who on Monday morning they say, hey, let's get together, read the word, let's worship together, let's pool our financial resources and our time resources to serve the rest of our workplace. That is what I ultimately want to see. And the pandemic has really unearthed the opportunity for me to realize that that's what it can look like. And I have a team of people that are invested in it, and our church has been on board. So we're excited, and we want to partner with the greater capital region. So if there are pastors on this call that are like, yes, like I want to see, the capital region totally reached with the good news and see everyone have the opportunity to hear the message. We do not think we can do this on our own. We want to partner with all different denominations and people groups and languages and cultures. We've got a Portuguese church that we're partnered with in our building. And we just believe that that's God's heart for the capital region. And so I'm excited to try and do it God's way. And just do it really easily. So.
Well, thank you for sharing both your vision and your enthusiasm. And that was Brittany Moore. I'd like to go back to Dr. Booth again. You talked about in your last response how your worship has changed now that you're back in person again. I was wondering, are there other ways in which your church life has changed, or you envision it changing going forward after the pandemic?
Yes, definitely. Things have changed. And we're glad about it. And we're seeking God's direction in all of these changes. as I said, there's a number of people who are coming, and people are coming because they saw us on Facebook Live. A number of them have never set foot in a church building and never thought they would. But because of what they saw on Facebook Live in the ministry that was taking place, they said, we're coming. This reminds me of when Jesus cast that net and everything came up in the net. So now we have to ask the Lord and seek the Lord's direction on how to minister to the numbers of people who are coming who weren't previously coming to Riverview Church, but had seen us on Facebook Live and wanted to be a part of the fellowship in the building. One of the things that kept us focused on what God was doing was to recognize that the church, we had to stop saying the church is closed and correct people who were saying, oh, your church is closed. No, our church never closed, because you can't close the church. You can close the building, but the church lives on because the church is the people. So that idea, that understanding that we are a people of God everywhere has to saturate. And if we're not in a building, thank goodness for this technology that we can use to connect with one another. So as the pandemic lessens, we are seeing that we have people who are now attending that need to be, as Pastor Moore, Brittany said, discipled, to understand what it means to be a part of the fellowship. We've had one baptism so far this year, where we baptized 5 people into the fellowship. And we've got to get ready to do that even more. But training in new membership, discipleship, and what it means to be a part of the body of Christ, that's what's going to be on our agenda. And we've got to learn to do it in a very creative way. As I mentioned, there are people from outside of the United States who are worshiping with us on Sunday morning. I mean, they're worshiping in the evening because they're the time difference. And they're also asking questions about their faith. So we are constantly, and I say constantly, about 2 days a week, we respond to emails and messages from people who've participated in worship, and they have questions. So we've had to set aside time during the week to respond to those questions that come through Facebook Live Messenger. And that's something new for us. But we're anticipating what God will do. And we already know it's not going to look like what we've done in the past.
Very good. Thank you very much. Let me go back to Father Pat Butler now. For a lot of people, interacting socially, connecting with other people is very important. I know in our tradition, people look forward to coffee hour after Sunday worship at St. Edward's. Can you do any creative new activities to help people stay engaged with each other and meet new people?
Well, it's interesting because those social events were always very important. A simple little thing, on Friday morning after Mass, we would, the Knights of Columbus would have a breakfast. We'd get anywhere from 50 to 100 people who would show up. And it was the best $3 breakfast you could get in Clifton Park. You got more food. I don't know how they made any money at all. But it was that sense of camaraderie that was just important. And people knew who was present. They knew when they weren't present. And they could be able to then reach out to them. So just those social connections are important. In the early weeks of the pandemic, we weren't really allowed to gather as a community for worship. As I said, many of our parishioners are elderly. They have particular needs that have to be looked after. And we were trying to find as many ways as possible to reach out and stay in touch and maintain that sense of community. So when we couldn't gather, we tried to develop more neighborhood areas of connection. We've always had a pastoral care office. We would be constantly reaching out to the sick, those hospitalized, the homebound, those institutionalized members of our community. We really tried to intensify our efforts to stay in touch with all of our parishioners. And we did that using multimedia efforts. We developed phone trees, neighbors checking on neighbors. We did the outdoor greetings at nursing homes, and we'd have small groups of people who would go and just be present and to let people know we were thinking of them. We had some Zoom and YouTube connections to our community. And one of the things we tried to do in terms of the whole socialization piece was to get as many of our young people as possible involved in calling on the elderly members of the community. We wanted them to see that connection together. And so we had youth make online greetings to see how they were doing, or sometimes just to cheer their day. And they would come together, socially distanced, to make greeting cards and deliver some sweets to the homes, just to let them know that we were thinking about them. And the idea was really to have an outreach to ages, all ages. I think that a lot of new connections were made. And I think that, post-pandemic, it's going to be a much stronger community because of that. They're still asking about each other and wanting to somehow come together and connect now as a family. One of the things we have done is we've tried to assess all of the operations in the parish and the various ministries we've had. We're trying to see what has worked and what hasn't worked. And if some of the efforts have outlived their original purpose, we'd like to redefine them so we can free up some volunteers to pursue new goals. Part of the social aspect has always been service. We've built several homes for Habitat for Humanity. We have a sister parish in Peru we've had people ministering with and to. We'd like to re-engage those efforts post-pandemic and just really try to continue to grow online in whatever people are trying to deal with. We have the social aspects. We used to have large parties that would really connect people, and that was a wonderful thing just to energize them. And then try to get groups to go out for service activities following those. So we're hoping that this is coming to an end soon and that we can, begin to build back in those coffee hours after Mass, those opportunities to gather for socializing and getting to know one another. And in the process of doing that, to see what people's real needs are in the community and to try to engage them.
All right, thank you very much. I want to go back to Father Scott Garno now. Again, from your perspective in the Standing Committee, looking at the Episcopal Diocese of Albany, what has changed the most in how churches conduct their ministry? I wonder if you've seen any trends there.
Yeah, as you can imagine, there are some trends there. I think I will start with a word that's not always associated very much with Episcopal churches, but that we've seemed to have been learning on the fly, I guess you'd say, over the last year, and that is flexibility. Being flexible in how we do things and the way we do them. Part of that flexibility is a dawning realization for many churches that not all ministry needs to happen at the church. With the pandemic, we were forced to do more ministries outside the church with virtual Bible studies and virtual fellowships and such like that. And many churches have acknowledged that a lot of those ministries that have been happening outside of the church will continue to need to be done outside the church, or at least that being an option. Perhaps Bible studies that have been meeting virtually instead of returning to the church library, can start meeting in a family home, as it's safe to do that. Most of our churches that have done live streaming of services have already committed to continuing to do that. Many for the reason that I mentioned earlier, of the idea that we're reaching people far beyond our normal regions. And one of the things that many churches seem to be allowing themselves to ask a question of, which is a question that we may never have given ourselves the permission to ask before without being forced into it by the pandemic, is simply the question of what is essential. What is essential with, especially in the framework of worship. Worship itself is essential. Many churches have identified prayer as essential. My own church, we identified that music was essential, but what wasn't essential was how we assumed that music had to be presented. Much of the congregation loves singing, but for the longest time, that was not something that we could safely do. But people made it clear to me that, okay, we'll give up singing for a while, but we still want some sort of music. So we've had this burgeoning soloist and small groups offering music, and we've been incredibly blessed by that. And many churches are taking this opportunity to say, okay, what's essential? And then in those things that are essential, do we need to do it the way we've always done it, or is there a different way that we can do it? One of the things that we struggled with, many of the churches struggled with, is for us as a liturgical church, sacraments are essential, always have been, probably always will be essential to who we are. And sacraments, by their definition, are tangible, they're physical, if you will. So how do we offer people sacraments in a way that during the pandemic that was safe to offer them? And is there anything we can learn from offering people sacraments in a safe way that can translate into the future? I don't have a lot of answers to that question yet, and I think a lot of us are still struggling with what does it mean to offer tangible sacraments in a different way. But this is a big change for many Episcopal churches, because we haven't even asked, many of us, I won't say all of us, but many of us have not even asked that question before. And in essence, we're pushed into asking that question. And then the last thing I'll say is one of the biggest changes that I've seen and that others seem to have seen is a new understanding of the importance of coming together, and the idea of let's not take church for granted. Many of us, when we thought church was not going to be there for us for an extended period of time, really came to the realization that, okay, I can't take this for granted anymore. And thankfully, we were able to, most of us were able to offer opportunities for fellowship and worship and sacraments online. But it just drove home that idea of not taking all of this for granted and being flexible.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that perspective. And then finally, Chris Messler, again, as a member of your reopening team in your congregation, what changes do you anticipate that'll take place in worship and ministry in the next several months?
Well, we've had a time to reflect, and we realized that we're much stronger than we ever knew. When people said the church is not just the building, boy, that really came home to all of us in this past year. I think right now we're working on some of the changes of balancing in-person versus remote worship, and actually how we integrate the two. We're looking for ways that we can meet the challenge of engaging our remote participants And we also really now have the ability to continue participation of longtime church members who may be out of the area. And I think one of the most exciting things we've seen in the last year is the fact that we've been able to continue to engage many of our college students. It's great to see that we can have a lay reader reading to us from the University of Pittsburgh, which is something in the past we only got to see our college students possibly on holidays or during the summer. I think one of the other changes for us is that we are really looking at the opportunities for virtual participation with boards and committees. Westminster is unique in the fact that the large majority of the church members drive in from other locations, anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes away. And I know myself, it's been challenging at times to serve on boards because, you know, do I go all the way home from work when I'm 5 minutes from the church and drive back in? And it was always, you know, heavy to make that choice. I think we really do have that opportunity to really strengthen the participation in our boards and committees and different programs in the evening with the option of being able to participate remotely. The other change for us is that we will be having to constantly monitor changes in guidelines in community rates. We do have a significant older population in our church. And I know we have some with compromised health status and times where we may have to really on a moment's notice potentially make any changes. And we are monitoring those guidelines constantly. I'm thinking we may be seeing another announcement within the next day or two now that our immunization rate is approaching 70%, if not at 70%. As some other people had mentioned, the social aspect of the church is really significant. When we first open up, we have at this point committed that we won't be having coffee hour. And coffee hour, as it is in most churches, is our chance to catch up with finding out, you know, what's going on in different people's lives. That's when you really sometimes identify the needs. But I think that's going to be a significant change for us is that we do, I think somebody had mentioned that they were a huggy congregation. I think we tend to be a bit of a social and huggy congregation. We're looking for other ways to meet that. We're working on having other social activities outside the church to really increase that interaction with each other. So I think the changes are positive. And again, I think the most significant change is that we've really realized the strength of our congregation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristen. My thanks to all the panelists. What we're going to do now is for the next 15 minutes, break you all up into small groups of 3 or 4 each. And in your time in those small groups, I have 2 questions for you to reflect on. One is, in the presentations you just heard, what did you hear that challenged you, that inspired you, or was helpful? And the second question, are there insights from your own congregation you'd like to share with others? So first, in what you just heard, what challenged you, inspired you, or was helpful to you? And then are there insights from your own congregation? So Bruce, can you break us up? And in 15 minutes, then we'll call you back again. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good discussion with others there. Before we met today, some people submitted questions. And so I'd like to throw them out for any of the panelists who would like to respond. So the first question comes to us from Diane Snyder, who is Director of Youth Ministry at Hebron United Presbyterian in Salem, New York. And she asks, just curious how others are approaching opening their nursery and what is involved in that. I would like to reopen ours, but have not yet, so would welcome some insights. So any of our panelists deal with the question of reopening your nursery on Sunday mornings? Are panelists still with us?
I'm not sure nursery includes infants but we have a children's church that we opened just the first Sunday in this month. if that's close to a nursery. I'm not sure. But we don't have any infants. The youngest person in children's church is 7 years old. So they sit distanced and they wear masks. Our teachers, there are 4 of us. We don't wear masks. We're all vaccinated, but the children do, and they sit distanced. They all have their packets of information. It's in a bag that they handle themselves when they come. Their book, their writing utensils, their crayons, those type things are always theirs, where they collect them. We collect them at the end and distribute them at the beginning, and they collect it all. They have to pack it up themselves and put it away. And then we do serve a snack, which is individually wrapped, different things like, what is it, goldfish or chips or something like that, and juices. So that is our children's church. It's not a nursery.
How about any of the other panelists? Do you have a nursery?
At Westminster, we have a crib room, and at this point, when we open in September, I don't anticipate our crib room will be open yet. I think that's for further discussion, but currently we're not. Our crib room is not open.
Anybody have a nursery that is open? Okay, I'll go to the next question. And again, for all the panelists, when we'll be able to safely sing in church again? And I think that experience varies. Some churches started singing long ago, some do not sing. So what are you doing about singing?
We were just talking about this in our small group, actually, but my church has returned to singing in the congregation, but we require people to continue to wear masks when they're singing. But I know of churches in our denomination where that's not even the case. Masks aren't required. Most of our dioceses still require masks for singing, but we have returned to offering some congregational singing.
Thank you. How about the other panelists? Do you have singing in your church, the congregation?
Westminster is having a small gathering over the summer in the church with the choir members, all of which are vaccinated, and the new guidelines from the state issued on June 9th says that they can be singing unmasked if they are fully vaccinated. And I just had a message pop up that the governor right now is holding a press conference with making an announcement about reopening New York. So I think we will see changes to the religious services probably coming forward today or within the week.
Thanks for catching that, Chris.
Yes.
We haven't been singing since the pandemic started. We just began 2 weeks ago again. We would have cantors and a small choir, but we've just started again, but again with masks.
And following up on that, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, at Riverview Church, we've been singing with masks. And then we have small, a duet, a solo, but not a choir, but congregational singing.
And that seems to be fairly common. So the other question, the last one was actually been alluded to already, but we didn't get an answer. Churches that use the common cup for communion, do you ever see a time when you'll go back to that? And if so, what guidelines are you going to follow?
We use a common cup in most Episcopal churches. We have not gone back to that yet. And I think we're probably a ways off from that. I certainly would like to think we could at some point. But I think we're still a ways away from that. And even when we do, my assumption has always been that a good number of people will probably still choose not to drink from the common cup. We do allow people what we call intincting, which is to dip the edge of the wafer into the wine. I got a feeling a lot of people are going to be doing that for quite some time, even when we do return to receiving the cup.
I would agree with all of that.
Did you use a common cup before the pandemic?
Yes.
Well, that's the only questions I had that were submitted ahead of time. The audience was still here. Do you have any questions for our panelists before we go? If you do, just unmute yourself and ask the question.
I'd just like to share that our small group felt that there was probably going to be a need for grief processing as we reopen and more people come back together, and how might we incorporate that to help the people that have had loss, either loss of a loved one dying or other losses, financial or whatever, that's caused them to be in a deep grief situation. And the group I was in thought that we should do this again to maybe address that question and further some of these discussions.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Bill, there was a question in the chat for churches that have reopened. What change is seen in rates of infection? I think, Carol, I'm going to change that to, has any church seen an impact from reopening? And if I'm incorrect in that, asking it that way, please tell me.
That's fine. I was trying to type quickly in the basically to see whether, if there's what has been the impact of reopening. But yeah.
I'll
I'll
jump
just
in on
say-
that.
Oh.
Go ahead, Dr. Booth.
Yeah, at Riverview, like I said, we were opened. We opened the building August of last year, and we have not seen since then. No one has contracted COVID within the families. There hasn't been any transmission that we know of, and no one has mentioned it to us. We've held a memorial in our building where individuals had to sign their name and address and email address, just in case something happened with the health department or whatever would contact you if there was some issue that broke out, and that nothing had happened from that either. So we're thankful.
I would echo that for my church too. We keep track of everybody who comes. And at this point, about 80% are vaccinated. And as far as I know, nobody's contracted the COVID from coming to church.
I was going to echo that same thing. That was honestly one of my biggest anxieties reopening in late June last year, was that somebody was going to get sick at the church. And by the grace of God, there's never been any, never even been contacted by Department of Health for contact tracing or anything like that. So as far as I know, there's been nobody's gotten sick from coming to church. And we've had a number of people and families connected to the church that were sick with COVID throughout. But thankfully, none of them were at church in or around the times when they were or got sick. So we have not had any of that so far.
I do want to say, this is where I put on my health. I retired from the state health department. I put on my public health hat. I think that's where you have to realize, we were very fortunate after the initial crisis last March and April in New York State. Our numbers have been relatively better than rest of the country. And certainly even when we hit the peak or the spike again over the winter, our numbers were lower than other parts. But I think that we've all been very conservative, even the churches that have been operating with in-person worship. They've been very conservative. I think the problem has come where you've seen, it's certainly in the news, the gathering of 1,500 people with no mass singing for 3 hours. That's risky. Our church, we had several members that were essential workers in group homes, in different healthcare settings, who did test positive for COVID. Their entire family became infected. So we know it's been out there in the community, but I think we really have to give ourselves a tremendous pat on the back for how considerate and all the conservative measures that the churches have taken has really paid off.
Thank you, Chris.
So there was, Bill, there was two other questions. One was about passing the plate. I'm going to kind of summarize what's going on in the chat. The response, and I think this would be the response that most people had, is, obviously online giving is something everybody has learned how to figure out how to do, which has been a good practice for a while. But the other one is leaving a plate. And I would be surprised if anyone's actually passing the plate, but having it available for people to put in on their way in and the way out. And also another one is having people signing in and out. And again, some churches have stopped, other churches are continuing. So I'll throw both of those out if anybody has a response that adds to what I've already said.
Well, I just got another news flash. It said we hit the 70% mark as expected, and the governor has, the restrictions are being lifted. So I think it would be worth going to the New York Forward website within the next day or two, and then we'll have the new guidance for religious services. And I don't want to guess, but I think that possibly that keeping the registration may be over.
Yeah. So Sue, the follow-up question to the plate is, will people return to passing the plate? Which I'm going to guess most people at the point in time when they feel comfortable doing that. Again, if there's something different to add to that.
At Riverview Church, we pass the plate. The congregants don't touch it. The person with it just gets it to the person.
Makes it available.
As close as possible.
Within reach.
Yes.
There is another good one here on Mass. Christine or somebody else may know the answer to this. I'm not sure, I know that a lot of stores are allowing people in who are vaccinated without masks. Any from anybody, Christine or anybody else, date to any of that?
I'm sorry, I missed the point about stores or about the church or
mask wearing. And how is mask being done?
It's changing so rapidly, and we do have difference between some contradiction between the state and the federal guidelines. I think it would, we need to see what today's announcement is and to see what today's guidance is. Even though they had lifted the mask mandate for vaccinated people, certainly stores were allowed to require masks, which has caused a shooting somewhere in the country this morning over that. So, it's masks are not without controversy.
Yeah. So Bill,
thank you.
Probably takes care of all the questions that I see.
Yeah, and we're at pretty much the end of our time. So I know, Bruce, you had some closing comments. You wanted to offer an invitation there, but my thanks to the panelists, my thanks to all of you who participated. I've enjoyed this. Hope you have too.
Yep. When I introduced myself, I didn't say it, but I am a congregant at Emmaus United Methodist Church. I'm a lifelong Methodist. I'm a certified lay speaker. So I do get the opportunity to lead worship in different places. But what I want to do is, first of all, we have a spring assembly. We do this every year, although we didn't do it last year. It's going to be Thursday, It is going to be, it is when we have awarded four $4,000 scholarships to high school students who are going on to college, and we will be presenting those at our spring assembly. That's Thursday night at 7. I did put our web address in the chat for anybody who would like to go. And if you go to the website, you could register for that. It is also going to be a Zoom meeting. For those that know that we do a crop walk every year, Albany Crop Walk. This year we raised over $100,000. So we met our goal for that. We're very thrilled with that. The Capillary Council of Churches has a variety of programs and partnerships. I will not going to bore you with all of them. Well, I wouldn't be boring you, but I'm not going to take the time to go through all of them. Since Miranda Rand is on the call, I will, that we do an ecumenical witness of baptism program that she runs, which hopefully we will be doing more and more of that as more and more churches open up. We are always open for suggestions of programs that the council could do. You are more than welcome to contact me, and I'm going to put my, I cannot do two things at once, so I'm going to put my contact information in the chat right now. There it is. But if you have an idea of any kind of a program that's wrapped around some kind of ecumenical or interfaith activity, I'd love to hear about it. We need to find programs in addition to everything else that we do that help our churches grow together, all of them. And whatever we can do from an ecumenical standpoint, doing, together what we cannot do alone, be more than happy to know about it. And I think that what we've done this morning is a great model for some of certain kinds of programs that we could do. The other thing is if there's anybody who would like to visit with Bill, myself, or the both of us to talk about the council and how your congregation can be involved, we'd love to meet with you via Zoom, via phone, in person, or whatever. Bill is not available on Sundays, but I do have I am happy to meet with congregations either to talk strictly about the council, or I do have a sermon that I've been doing at United Methodist Churches that's wrapped around spiritual gifts in 1 Corinthians and the history of the council, and using spiritual gifts to make all of these different kind of things happen. So I'd be happy to do that also. And the final thing is, we're always, as all of you are, we're always looking for people who want to be involved. We have finance committee, communications committee, development committee that always can use more and new blood. So we'd love to have anybody become involved in the council in any way that you see fit. And having said all of that, Bill, I guess I'm done.
Very good. And we're at our time here, so thank you very much. I appreciate both the panelists and everybody else who gave their time. Have a good afternoon.